Well, good afternoon, Lisa Colella. Good afternoon, Scott Baker.
Good afternoon, Mikey
Hey,
Ames.
indeed. And Mikey, I'm pretty bored with you. And most of what we've talked about in the last couple of days has been fairly trivial. And so we needed somebody smarter in the room. And so we brought in Lisa to talk about this very thing. Because the title of the field note today, thank you everybody for tuning in to Lead Better. Field note 1707, if you're counting. Good leaders make the room smarter. And it's actually not about the leader being like, I'm the smartest one in the room. It's actually kind of much different than that. But it is appealing, isn't it, Lisa, when you're in a room and you kind of know this person always makes the discussion so interesting. This person always makes me walk out feeling like I know more, I know where we're going, I feel more, motivated. And it makes you want to go back to those meetings, doesn't it?
100%. I mean, that's my role today, is just elevating the
There you
collective
go.
of the group, as you say.
Yeah. So you as an advisor to leaders and organizations, sometimes leaders get in their own way. Like
Yeah.
they get a little bit too impressed with themselves. How do you maneuver them to say it's not about you here?
Well, I think the first thing is, recognizing that expertise is one of the many paradoxes of leadership,
Hmm.
right? It's like the more you get to a point of leadership because you've seen the same scenarios so many times that you start to develop patterns. And that can be really helpful as a leader if you're in a position where you have to make a decision quickly, you have limited conversations to have. But it can really actually be a detriment if you're in charge of a group. You can jump to
Hmm.
conclusions too quickly. I mean, I
Hmm.
experienced it firsthand when I was leading teams in-house at Philips and so forth. It was something I was working on and being coached through, where just because you've done it, 4 or 5 times doesn't mean the situation is exactly the same. And so we start to really work on slowing down, understanding that expertise when it comes to, group problem solving, group discussions can actually be an Achilles heel. And so
Yeah.
there's some questioning and some patterns that they need to kind of slow down and think through to help make sure that expertise doesn't hinder them and their teams in ways.
Right. Yeah. Now, Mikey, you said that today on our field note that does go out all around the world, 183 countries, that there were a good amount of comments and back and forth on this one. And let me ask you before you kind of lay that all out, that early on in this field note is a kind of a provocative statement that there's something that good leaders do. They invite and reward questions, but great leaders require and reward reasoning. I thought that's an interesting idea. I don't think I'd ever really heard it phrased that way. So I'm curious about what the reaction to this field note in general was, and then if you have any thoughts, particularly on how leaders go about rewarding reasoning.
Right. Okay. So the idea of rewarding reasoning did come up in one of our comments from Violet, mentioning that she oftentimes thinks that the next layer of what happens over time, how certain voices become the ones that in
Hmm.
the room instinctively everyone defers to,
Hmm.
even in well-facilitated discussions, what is going on outside of the room where certain people kind of get this trust deferment foisted on them, so that
Hmm.
more than just a group discussion and how a leader might do it in the room, how might a leader do this outside of the room to make sure that those minor voices in the organization can somehow become more elevated, more trusted, even
Hmm.
outside of the actual conversation. And I'm not completely clear on how to do that, except for it I know that it starts with the leader, and I know that that's a cultural question, not a conversational question, right? So I would put this question back to the two of you. How might you actually address the idea of, like, this needs to be a more trusted voice in the hallway as well? How do we get there?
The voice outside the room. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. To me, it comes down to, the makings of status and hierarchy. And in the field note, it kind of refers to that as the most senior person in the room. But what
Hmm.
you're referencing, Mikey, is someone who's built up credibility with a lot of people over time, right? They're probably good at relationships. And it takes those people to know that they have a position of status and influence and hierarchy, whether or not their title reflects it, so that they're aware that they are the folks people look to. And so they then become the leader in the room to be able to give others the platform and really ask some probing questions around their reasoning.
Well, and this goes right to a couple of the three main legs of this field note. So, and this is the universal symbol for three main legs. For those of you who are listening later, I'm just doing odd things with my hands. So the three kind of elements about how we do this, and I'll list them and then we can kind of unpack them, are good elevators, good leaders elevate the discussion by deliberately distributing airtime, right? And we can all kind of have an idea what that means and we'll explain it. Second, the best leaders know that the sequence of who speaks and in what order, that also plays a big role, particularly on, as you guys were just talking about, who gets called on as a senior voice in that area. And then the last one is how the leader elevates the collective wisdom by projecting the fragile insights. Now, sometimes we think about how you elevate the smaller voice or the junior person, and that's a part of this. But I thought that was really interesting, this idea that sometimes there are fragile insights that other people might just blow by, and the leader goes, wait a minute, can we go back? What was the phrase from, like a double click? People used to say that like a couple years ago. Can we go back and double click on that one? I thought that's a really unique idea. So which one of these resonated with you the most or caused you to think, Lisa?
I think the last one's really interesting, and I think I was in 3 meetings today where double click was still used. So
but there's okay, all right, yeah,
semantic scene. But I think that one's interesting because to me, it's not just that you're making that pause, but it's how you're then following up with it. There's a fine distinction between, are you soliciting opinions or are you examining the reasoning, right? The opinions are the outcomes that one would have after going through their own reasoning and thought process and ideas. And a lot of leaders just say, wait, I want to pause there. What do you all think? Right? That's asking for opinions, but that doesn't actually get to the underlying examination area, which is the reasoning that led to those opinions. And so that's, I think, an important nuance, that not just to recognize the fragile insight, but how you go about intervening and kind of guiding that conversation is a really important, behavior for leaders to understand.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the first one a little bit and want to get your insight on this. Like when we are intentionally distributing airtime, it would be with like a specific kind of way that we would do it around the table. And it might be as simple as, we haven't heard from Julie today. Julie, what do you think about this subject? Right. And calling out those that are mostly silent. But I'd like to eventually get to a point where that doesn't become like what I'm known for. Yeah.
Yes.
Like,
right. Yeah. Right.
So if I actually call out Julie 3 times in a row, then there's something about like Julie not getting it, or Julie not truly understanding what I'm trying to say, Julie not doing it on her own. And so does that automatically turn into a private discussion that I need to, or can we remain with the fact that, okay, here's my time to call out Julie?
Well, could some of it be a little bit of specificity? Like if the leader, instead of saying like, Julie, you just joined our team, why don't you tell us what, that's a little bit sort of generic. Whereas if I say, Julie, the last organization you work for, you were in this division, and I know they rolled out a campaign like this. What did you learn there? Right. So if it shows that I, as a leader, am calling on you for a reason, I don't know, does that make it feel a little less, like an artifice?
I think the quality of the call out absolutely matters, and the more specificity and context certainly matters, Scott. For me, it can't become a pattern. To your point, like you can't call on Julie 3 times, and I think we also need to be aware of there are underlying status and perspectives as well. I mean, if it's always a male calling out a female, like that doesn't look well. Like so, I think we just need to be aware of it. But to your point, Mikey, I think a lot of it happens outside the room. That's where the leader needs to be working towards player-led teams, where it's not just the leader calling out a voice. It's everyone in the room looking to other people for their contribution. It's a conversation with Julie or whomever beforehand of, I really want to hear a voice in this meeting, and here's why, and here's what I think you bring valuable insights to the discussion. So a lot of it's outside the moment, but I also think it can't become a pattern, and that player-led team dynamic needs to happen in some of these conversations too.
Do you think a leader who is good at facilitating this inside of the room almost has to be good at it outside of the room as well? Or do you think it's a unique enough skill that there could be people who are just good in the room?
It's a good question. I think it's pretty universal, because it's less about the in the moment prompt, and it's more about, do you value the opinions of others? Are you self-aware of your expertise and where that could become a liability? And a conversation's a conversation, right? So I think people that are good at it are naturally good, but there are always some exceptions, I'm sure, and I'm sure Scott Baker has many of them on the top of his head.
Yeah, I could see that from a journalist point of view. Did most of the time you were just interviewing one subject, but this kind of skill that we're talking about would come up frequently if you were interviewing panels, right?
Yeah. We have our little mini panel here now. I don't know that I have a perfect answer. Like I really don't. Like I mean, I think that the context of how I think we've underlined really important things. I think that, Lisa, what you were saying around, you can't have a certain pattern. There has to be, a reason for the question. But I think if you're kind of going to this element of like, where is the wisdom? I think part of it is you actually have to see what is actually being produced in the dialogue and being ready to say, wait a minute, it may be the unexpected person that actually says the thing that recenters the conversation. And it's not just a fragile insight. And I think just sometimes it might even be the person that disagreed with you. Mm-hmm. And so I think the leader who's like, I'm going to change my mind. Lisa's right about this. And I think that that's the thing that if you are truly sort of committed to what emerges in the conversation, then real things happen. And I think that's what makes these meetings, next level. Now, I mean, let me put it this way. Lisa, I've been in the organization 9 years. I can't remember how many years, you've been, a part of the team. We have where we get together every 2 months. So we'll talk shop for 2 minutes here. So we just had one of these meetings last week in Chicago. Now, I look at these meetings and I find them all kind of wildly exciting. I mean, they're all like really kind of fascinating grown-up conversations where you're like, back when I was in college, I was like, yeah, maybe someday I'd be in an organization where they talk about really cool things. You're like, well, it's actually happening. This is really, interesting. So, we've seen our meetings, some of them better than others, but all of them are pretty good, right? So for you coming into the organization in more recent years, what has surprised you about the way that Admired Leadership holds these kinds of meetings in a way that might make everyone in the room a little bit smarter? Have things stood out to you that are different in how we do it? I know this is like an inside, baseball question here, but are there insights? Are there things that like you see us doing in Chicago that you're like, I wish everybody did this?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think different from the path we were starting to go down there, what came to mind for me is there needs to be an assumption that everyone in the room is an adult. And the goal maintains to raise the collective intelligence towards a better outcome. The goal itself can't be to get Julie to speak more, right? And in the strategic communication practice, whenever we do strategic message design or anything, we really emphasize it. Like, we need to talk to people as if they're fully formed adults and they can handle hard truths, they can handle things. And I think the same is true here, where we can't be going into the room and overly focused on, if Todd's too emotional or something, or is Billy going to speak enough? This is just a craft that great leaders do naturally because they see that goal and they can bring the right points of view into the conversation. And that, I think, is what we do so well within our firm. It's everyone knows we're there. We're fully formed humans. We're really aiming to garner unique insights about different aspects of leadership. And that's why it works so well.
Scott, I'm going to ask you a question that came in by way of the chat. Our good veterinary friend, William Tancredi. How do you deflect contributions that are objectively bad? Like, what is the good way to do it? Like, especially if it comes from a voice that you're trying to elevate, but everybody in the room knows this was a really bad idea.
Yeah. Well, and I've sometimes seen great leaders in our organization talk about this, both for the meeting and also sometimes for speakers, like in a Q&A, and or the person that tries to dominate the conversation. There is a way to affirm that. There's always something that you can affirm about the way that it came in, right? To say, there's a lot of curiosity there. I think that you've identified a real problem. I don't have to go right to the solution, right? I think your analysis is really crap, but I can find a way to say, glad you brought that up. That's a really interesting thing. Joe, this is your, move it to the next person. I think that that's the thing that kind of helps look at it this way. I love the image, and I've heard Randall say this in the past, that how do you tap dance? How do you make it seem elegant? And that should be the challenge. It shouldn't be the kind of like, and make everybody in the room feel more awkward. How do you take the thing that feels a little bit awkward and just make it feel like it was just fine, right?
Right.
And then that person is probably sitting there going like, darn it, I shouldn't have asked it that way. They're kicking themselves already, right? They
Right.
kind of probably know it didn't land. So just be forgiving, have some grace, move it past it, get it to the next level of the conversation, and you can get better at that. I don't know.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does to me. And to kind of cap this off, even though we're a minute past here, Lisa, I think to address Steve's question that came up in the comments earlier, when he
Yeah.
mentioned if someone in the room is making the room smarter with logic and facts instead of emotions, which is a lot of what I hear from my students, they say things like, I feel like, or I'd be more
Mhm.
comfortable with, right? And so Steve's question was specifically about how do I address emotions, but you answered that as you and I were talking earlier in a specific way that I think cut through it in a way that is now on the leader to understand what's actually going on when someone says, I feel like, or I'd be more comfortable with, instead of talking about facts.
Yeah, in the obviously, I don't have all the context, but based on what you shared, I don't hear that language as true expressions of feelings. Those are
Hmm.
what we call hedgers. So their actual
Hmm.
point of view and
Hmm.
contribution are behind that entry point. And often we
Hmm.
hear those sort of hedgers, I think, I feel, when people either aren't as sure as they want to be in the answer that they're about to give to you, or if they're either intentionally or unintentionally coming across as very attractive or deferential to whomever's in the room. For
Yeah.
us, within our style code, we have specific behaviors that would help someone intentionally come across as more powerful or more attractive. And using hedgers like I feel, I think, I'd be more comfortable with are very much in the attractive camp. Now, for a student, they probably are not thinking about it in that way. But for Scott, don't assume that they're just wanting to share that they, feel sad about something. It truly is
Yeah.
just a hedger to get to their point in a way that they want to come across as not too powerful or in opposition to.
Great. So much for leaders to
Dynamite.
think about here. And this is like beyond just the skill, there's definitely an art form here in being able to know where to deploy those skills properly. We had a great participation online today, by the way, for the both of you. And I think it's our highest concurrent viewing over on Substack that we've ever had, up to 385 viewers. Couple of
Great.
questions and comments that have come through. We encourage you to join us tomorrow for the same kind of conversation that we'll have on another leadership topic. Scott, do we know what that headline is coming up for tomorrow yet?
I was about to say no, but then we actually do. It's sometimes like if you want to know, we do these things cutting edge. Like we make these field notes, like we get them ready that like either the night before. I mean, we come up right to the deadline. And so tomorrow's headline, this is advanced just for you guys. Like we're not telling anybody else. How
I don't know
leaders
either.
talk
I'm
about
excited to hear it.
how leaders talk about AI can influence acceptance or resistance. So AI is obviously a big topic. Only 12% of the American workforce is using AI on a daily basis. So how should leaders talk about it? Well, how leaders talk about it is very important. We'll talk about that tomorrow.
Great. Thank you both. We'll see you.